Can expect to attract $120 to $160 billion of foreign direct investment annually by 2025. That is, if it is able to maintain its FDI to GDP ratio between 3 to 4%. This according to a CII-EY report on FDI in India. The report adds that this in turn can help boost India's GDP growth rate to 7 to 8%. For context, India's FDI to GDP ratio has lagged at 1.8% in the current decade. The report, based on a survey to gauge market sentiment among Indians as well as non-Indian companies, notes that India has emerged as one of the top 3 choices for overseas investments in the next 2 to 3 years. About 50% of respondents see India amongst the top 3 economies or leading manufacturing destinations of the world by 2025. The respondents have pinned down market potential, skilled workforce and political stability as the top 3 reasons that make India their favoured destination. As the COVID-19 pandemic resets economies across the world, FDI will play a significant role in reviving economic growth, as it is an important source of non-debt finance for development. So what needs to be done to improve India's competitiveness, and is the current reform agenda helping the cause? Hello and welcome to CNBC-TV18's Eye on India. I'm Shireen Bhan. Joining me today are Kamal Bali, the President and Managing Director at Volvo Group India, Akshay Bellare, the President at Honeywell India, and Sudhir Kapadia, the National Tax Leader at EY India. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us here on the program. Mr. Kapadia, let me ask you to start with, this survey gauges the pulse of what investors are currently thinking, both domestic as well as global. India, of course, has managed to do quite well on the FDI front over the last few years. What are the 3 top considerations that investors are looking at, especially in the context of this reshaping of the global supply chain? Mr. Kapadia, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Shireen. That's a great question. I was saying the top 3 concerns or areas which can further improve India's rankings, as you put it. One is infrastructure, which we have all talked about. But I think in precise terms, what our survey respondents pointed out is the speed of turning around shipments at the ports, at the airports, because that is where the link to the global supply chain will come in, and the geopolitical opportunities which India needs to capture. So I think this is one key area in infrastructure for sure. I think the second area which keeps coming back, and as you remember is also there as where we are lagging behind in the ease of doing business rankings, is contract enforcements. If you recollect, Shireen, the CEA report, the survey, economic survey, also spoke about lower judiciary reforms in particular, and ensuring that some of the alternative dispute mechanisms, arbitration, mediation are brought in big time, because that is a big area of concern with foreign investors even today.
Yes, contract enforcement is, of course, one of the key concerns. Mr. Kapadia, on that, perhaps one of the big signals will be the government's move to either choose to appeal against the arbitration award in the Vodafone matter or let it pass. Do you think that that could be one of the key signals that global investors will be watching very closely, the position, the stance of the government in this matter?
Well, I have expressed a view, Shireen, that India would perhaps do well not to appeal, for the simple reason that it's a legacy matter. It has been decided in one particular manner by an international forum. I don't think India gets much. However, I think from the government's point of view, they don't want to set precedents for the future. But I personally think that is a great signal to give. I think linked to that, Shireen, going forward is also, we have talked about advanced pricing arrangements or APA and the advanced rulings, which our foreign investors have been talking about. So those steps were welcome, but there has been a tremendous slowdown in recent months and years in terms of finalizing these APAs in particular and AARs. So to give you an example, there are 800 APA applications pending, and some of them are as old as 5 years. So that's not helping. I think government really needs to enhance their capacities and ensure that this is put on the fast track.
Well, that certainly is an extremely important and valid point that you make there as far as the advanced pricing agreements are concerned, which has been a consternation in the past as well. But Mr. Bali, Volvo has, of course, been a long-term investor in India. Let me ask you about one of the sectors, which is the automobile sector that you deal with specifically. If I were to take a look at the decadal performance, FDI worth $24 billion has come in between April of 2000 and March of 2020. This is according to data of the DPIIT. Now, the government has already announced PLI schemes for some sectors like medical devices, pharmaceuticals, mobile manufacturing. Auto and auto components is now going to be part of the next set of 8 sectors where PLI schemes are in the process of being designed and delivered. What's the expectation? What would you like to see? Mr. Bali, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Shireen. Thank you very much. And to begin with, I completely echo what Sudhir has mentioned. I completely agree with him. And these are some of the key drivers for investments. If we can fix some of those 3 things which Sudhir talked about, I think India can further become a lot more attractive. But just coming back to your question on auto industry, to begin with, I must let you know that we as industry and as Volvo, we are all very bullish on the India story. And I think this recent pandemic has only accelerated the possibilities of the growth potential for India. As you know, that automotive industry accounts for almost 50% of the manufacturing sector. And if you look at the global manufacturing output, just one country accounts for 30% of the global manufacturing output. Now, post-pandemic, I think this is unsustainable, and the global supply chains will become more scattered and more diverse. And therefore, India stands a very, very good opportunity when it comes to automotive sector, because that's a very, very big weight in the manufacturing ecosystem. But yes, things like PLI is tremendously welcome. I think what we have seen over the last few years is a set of good reforms, starting with GST, IBC, and very low corporate tax rates. And now I think the proof of pudding lies in eating. We need to see how these labor codes will be implemented. And I think how we can get and what is in store in the PLI scheme, which is very, very important, because this sector needs, the automotive sector also needs several other things we need to really talk about different fuels. We need to talk about sustainability aspect. We need to talk about transport concepts, scrappage policy, GST rates, number of things, Shireen. But yes, all in all, we are very, very bullish. And as multinationals, I think as Sudhir mentioned, we look at 3 things basically looking at a country: a strategic fit, then fit for second would be a fit for a specific business case, and third would be an operational fit. So I think India ticks the boxes on the first 2 pretty well, but I think the third piece, the operational fit, and as Sudhir talked about, that is something which we need to speed up. And national infrastructure investment pipeline, if we can take that on mission mode, that will really be the game changer.
That could possibly be the game changer. But in terms of future investments, Mr. Bali, given the demand that you foresee for the Indian market, as well as the possibility of using India as an export hub for the Volvo Group, what kind of incremental investments are we talking about over the next few years? And will you apply under the PLI scheme as and when the details are made available?
No. Absolutely, PLI. We are really eagerly looking forward to the PLI scheme. But coming to Volvo Group's footprint in India, as you know, we have been serial investors. We for the last 22 years, we have a very good, successful joint venture with Eicher Motors, which is doing exceedingly well. Just to let you know, over the last 1 year, we invested in a new facility in Bhopal. We have a huge infrastructure in Indore with our joint venture, but we have extended the capacity and we have set up another plant, state-of-the-plant in Bhopal. So we are absolutely bullish, and we will invest as and when required keeping in view the capacity requirements and the new technology, which is also bringing in a lot of new paradigms in our sector. So we are absolutely looking
Yes.
at India as a, yeah.
As an investment destination, continued investment destination. Mr. Ballari, let me ask you, one of the things that we've seen happen as far as the FDI regime is concerned, further liberalization. So the caps have been done away with. Most sectors are now under the automatic route. But what we still have seen is that many MNCs prefer to come through the joint venture route, perhaps because they feel that the local partner provides a better understanding of the market. Do you believe that that will continue to be the preferred option as far as global investors who are putting money into India is concerned?
That is possible, Shireen, and thank you for having me on the show. But I think from a Honeywell perspective, we will be looking at investing here. In Honeywell, we have been in India for several decades now and have been continuing to make investments. And because a lot of the government programs and initiatives around Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, Digital India, the Smart City Initiative, all of these align very well with Honeywell's growth strategy. And so we have been making the investments. We will continue to make those investments here. And where we think partnerships make sense, we will certainly use those if it enhances the business model. But largely, as I said, we will be looking at making investments in the years to come. We just recently made an investment of the N95 masks in Pune, just to support the COVID crisis and to support the healthcare workers on the front line. So we look at these opportunities. India is a very attractive, high growth region for Honeywell, and we will continue to invest here.
High growth region for Honeywell. But, let me specifically ask you about manufacturing, Mr. Ballari. Do you believe that we could be on the cusp of breaking out of that manufacturing growth, which has been stuck for over a decade plus at about 15 to 16% of GDP? The hope and the aspiration is that we will now position ourselves as a much stronger manufacturing economy. Do you believe that the pieces are now in place to ensure that that does in fact happen?
Yes, I believe so, Shireen. I think a lot of factors. First, the geopolitical situations have sort of created the need to have regionalized supply chain. And then the COVID crisis only accelerated that effort and that initiative. And then, so those two were critical in recognizing, most companies recognizing the need for having regional, global, or regional supply chain networks. Then in the government's initiative on production-linked incentives, I think that is a very attractive, initiative that the government has put in place. That will really, I think, accelerate the investments coming into India for, really growing the manufacturing base here and creating a, manufacturing ecosystem that will actually be, able to export a lot. So I see us exporting out of India once we have established a very strong supply base, good manufacturing base in India.
Well, that's good to hear. What's the broad timeline that you believe you will start to use India as an export hub?
So we as I said, we just installed our new manufacturing line for N95. And we have a very good cost structure here, and we will look at ways to, use that facility not only for our local needs, but also for our global needs. We're doing that at our Pune factory, where we also manufacture control systems and equipment that goes into control systems. So, it is not new for Honeywell to use India as a manufacturing base for export, and we will continue to do that as the opportunities arise.
Well, we wish you the best of luck with that. But Mr. Kapadia, to pick up on the point that was being made there by Mr. Bellare, he believes that we could be on the cusp of breaking out on the manufacturing side. Again, if I were to take a look at the numbers, India's FDI to GDP ratio has been at about 1.8% for the past decade. And this is lower than what countries like Vietnam, etc., have achieved in that same period. So there is opportunity and headroom for growth. But are the pieces in place for us to be able to cope with or address some of the things that have held us back?
Right, Shireen, so three things here. I think one, I would just like to mention that we will see potentially some very far-reaching changes in the US tax code under the Biden-Harris proposals. Why I mention this is because when we talk about reshoring, and we talk about opportunities around the world, even for US-based multinationals or any multinational operating there, the tax rate in US is likely to go up, right, 28%, and effectively 30%, etc. So one, on manufacturing, I feel India has a great opportunity with the new 17%, including surcharge, effective tax rate for new manufacturing companies. There, one concrete suggestion we have, Shireen, is why restrict it to certain areas of manufacturing? I think it should be opened up like it is in the US tax code for anything which is creating jobs. So if we make it job related, I think it would be much better. That's one opportunity which India has. The second one, and I think you alluded to it, other colleagues alluded to it, both Mr. Bali and Dr. Akshay. If you see the PLI scheme, it has been really welcomed across the board for two reasons. One is, I think it is WTO compliant, and two is it creates a level playing field once you qualify, because you get a straight away a subsidy linked to your manufacturing investment. So to your point, Shireen, can India, and that is the basis for the 120 to 160 billion dollar potential which India has. We have said, even if we can't get to 6% of GDP, but we aspire to about 4% of GDP, which, by the way, China was at roughly the same level of India's development in the early 2000s. So even if we aspire for that, this potential is very much there. And one last point, Shireen, if you recollect, there is a Baba Kalyani report on SEZs, including setting up coastal clusters, not talking about tax incentives at all. But that is something which I think needs to be paid greater attention.
Well, that is an idea that dates back to the former Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Arvind Panagaria, coastal employment zones, as he called them. That was his big idea when he came to office at the start of the first tenure of this government, but hasn't found legs and hasn't found much currency. But, gentlemen, we will take a break. We're back in a moment on Eye on India to talk about India's tryst with foreign direct investment. Back in a minute. Eye on India, and I'm in conversation with Kamal Bali of the Volvo Group, Akshay Bellare from Honeywell India, and Sudhir Kapadia from EY India on the outlook for foreign direct investment. Mr. Bali, let me ask you about the opportunity in manufacturing at the low-skilled end, because that has been something that India has aspired for, but we have missed the bus previously. Do you believe that this time around, we could make amends there? Textiles, apparel, leather, footwear, furniture, and once again, through the PLI scheme, the government is hoping to be able to capitalize on this opportunity. Do you believe it's still doable? Mute. This is the problem, the challenge with having people on Zoom calls.
Sorry, Shireen. Sorry once again. Yeah. So Shireen, I strongly believe that I strongly believe that this is an opportunity for manufacturing across sectors, even in the low-skilled areas, because I think India has the necessary talent and the people capital. So I think that's one very, very big piece. We have the market, but I think what we need to do is we need to up the ante on technology. So when we talk of Atmanirbhar Bharat, I mean, it's a great idea. It aims to uplift our society and create opportunities for us, for everyone. So it touches some critical sectors from rural to small businesses, healthcare, everything. But I think it cannot happen on its own in a state of vacuum. It has to have a fine balance between domestic imperatives and external engagement. It will happen by opening doors wider for external stakeholders and incentivizing them with more local manufacturing, like with the PLI, and more domestic jobs. Atmanirbhar Bharat will not happen with increasing import duties. We should focus sector by sector, discuss items based on the
Okay.
individual HNS code, and agree on a phased progressive localization program. I think this is very important. It
Yeah.
should be transparent and irreversible for the next 10 years. If we have that sort of
Okay.
a framework and an approach, I think these sectors can also flourish.
Okay. Mr. Bellary, it's an important point that Mr. Bali has raised there in the context of this government's plan of Atmanirbhar Bharat, where import duties have been hiked, incentives are being given through PLI schemes, etc. Are there specific concerns that foreign investors have with regards to predictability of policy, with respect to whether India seems like it is moving more inwards, though the government has said that we welcome foreign direct investment? Are there any contradictory signals that foreign investors are picking up on that require clarification?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Shireen. I think the one, as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat, as I said, I think most multinationals, and Honeywell included, are strong supporters of the overall initiative. However, there are some things that we need to ensure is done in a very thoughtful way. For example, the public procurement order that requires a higher local content on goods. While we are, foreign companies and multinational companies, as I said, support the overall effort, to increase that content in a very short time frame will create significant challenges, and that will sort of, put some doubt in the minds of investors to establish, local manufacturing base. And so I think it is important to do that in a thoughtful way and do it, gradually, so that multinational companies, with their very complex global supply chain networks, are able to make the changes, put the investments here locally, and support the overall initiative of Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Mr. Kapadia, let me end by asking you, was this something that the survey picked up on? We just got one specific example being given here by Mr. Bellary on the public procurement side. The concern is that there should be transparency, there should be a phasing out of import restrictions, etc., or the need for localization. Was this something that the survey picked up on?
Right. Yes. So Shireen, just one clarification there. I think when the government announced some of these higher tariffs, it has made clear that it will be for a particular period with a sunset year, right, for these. So to that extent, there is predictability. I think the concern is coming in the context of what more products could be added. And I think that's where government probably needs to establish a mechanism to discuss in greater detail before new products. Because in every country, there is always going to be a bit of, friction between domestic interests and the need to import. So I think that is one part. The other point I would like to make, Shireen, is I think time has come that when we introduce reforms or any new provisions, there should be, quote unquote, an audit of effectiveness of those provisions at a periodic interval. I'll give you an example. Few years ago, during Mr. Jaitley's time, there is on the statute book a deduction for patent box, right, for Indian created patents. We know it's not working because the conditionalities are just, impractical. So my point is either we have it or we don't have it, and we have to measure it on the basis of ROI, that we took the trouble to have a legislation. Why is it not working and how we can make it work? And we need to engage with the stakeholders and see that it is successful. I think that is one reform from a government point of view which is really required. It will help us to then improve upon those and say, how do we make it work and how do we make it successful?
All right, so to sum it up, a practical, predictable and pragmatic roadmap for future course of action is what global as well as domestic investors seek. Bullish on India, continue to invest in India and hope that this time around manufacturing, which is the big hope, will truly break through. Kamal Bali, Akshay Bellare, Sudhir Kapadia, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on this edition of Eye on India. We'll take a break. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment.